And by finally going to watch it, I mean we're gonna see Charlie Kirk get blown out by some ladies talking about what a woman is. All right, here we go. Here we go. Again, it's the worst podcast ever called Whatever. And they just continually have conservative dipshits on. It's great. Yeah. I'm not trapped in here with you. You're all trapped in here with me.
You said earlier your boyfriend, you said he's not conservative, but he's liberal, and you're much further left. You're a leftist. And you said you would, when it comes to perhaps people, you would be friends
What
with
the hell is
someone
this
who's maybe more
podcast?
conservative, so you can shift them more left.
I mean, so the Whatever podcast is basically a bunch of guys who realized that even though they were kind of mediocre hosts, they could hire like girls off of OnlyFans to show up and like make their podcast look popular and hot and cool, and basically co-opt the audiences that these OnlyFans ladies had cultivated for their own viewership, right? So it allowed them to like just exponentially rise in popularity, and now this is like one of the most listened to and watched podcasts on the planet. And the people who run it are conservative dipshits, so they constantly bring on people like Michael Knowles, Charlie Kirk, Ben Shapiro. Well, I don't think Ben Shapiro's been on. Yeah, they bring on a lot of sussy folk, though. Why is there a random lady in a... I don't know. I don't understand the show. I'm being completely honest with you.
I said that tongue-in-cheek, but
Oh, you said that. I was going to ask, have you shifted your boyfriend more left?
I wish.
Okay, so he's pretty firm in his
He's firmly planted in his filthy liberalism, but I love him in spite of that.
I see. Okay, got it.
But we aligned on a lot of social issues, so if we want to like create a dichotomy of like social and then economic issues, I feel like the economic issues is primarily where we have disagreement, and the social issues, those tend to be, I feel like, the most polarizing and contentious. So if we had more disagreement there, we probably would not be able to be in a relationship together harmoniously.
Okay, I see.
But friends, yeah, I'm open to radical now.
Okay, got it. So, who here... I'm curious, who here considers themselves a feminist? Maybe just show of hands. Are you a feminist? That's it? Just Aaron and Pixie? Molly? A little bit? Okay. All right. So Charlie, we've got some feminists here. What do you think of feminism?
I want them to define the term first, because there's no use in me giving thoughts on an abstract concept. So I'm all ears.
What's your
Charlie
sense?
looks so uncomfortable in this room of hot
Feminism
ladies.
is just simply the advocacy of equality, both social, political, economic, on the basis of all genders everywhere. So that's what feminism is to me.
Do you concur?
I concur.
Do you concur?
Concurred.
Okay.
So you want me to give a thought on that?
Do you agree with their definition of feminism?
That would probably be the most agreed upon definition. So I do believe in equality under the law, obviously. I believe in equality for representation or enfranchisement to be able to vote, obviously. But you said economic equality? That's interesting. Do you think that female models and male models should be paid the same by law?
Keep it up, Sam.
Okay, so we should make female actresses and models be paid less because they earn about 20 times more than men.
I think when
so
you get
women would get a pay cut. You're okay
I think
with
when
that?
it comes to creative field.
Or, just spitballing here, men get paid more. Like you see how dumb, how low level his argument is. His framing there is scummy as hell because he puts forward the hypothetical. So you want women to make less money, huh? Doesn't seem very feminist, but really the argument could just be easily flipped on him. So you want men to make less. We could simply pay men more money. What is a blood grenade? What's the deal with the hemo grenade? Basically, in a nutshell, Norman Reedus died, but because of the nature of the catastrophe between the world of the living and the world of the dead, he, through fluke and circumstances, able to die and then return his soul back to his own body. And that makes him a very unique and special individual. And as a result, throughout the game, they're studying his various body excretions and turning them into grenades. And one of them being the blood grenade, which is very effective at destroying the ghosts that roam the world. That's the best I can do. I'm sorry if that did not clarify or clear up anything. But most of that money is from fans? What? The game wants you to piss on ghosts. It's true. There are also poop bombs. There's also bloody piss grenades. I'm more confused now than I was before. That's fair. Hideo Kojima games do be like that.
Feel that it's going to be very difficult to look at it on the basis of like sex or gender, how you would pay somebody, because that's going to have so many more factors than simply that. But if we're talking about equal economic opportunities, like for example, should like a man and woman doing the exact same position at a corporate office be paid the same if they're doing the same amount of work? Then
well, it
yes.
depends on what they study, depends how long they've been there, depends if they're equally as good at the job, it depends
But
how...
all else being
Hold
equal,
on.
I'm saying if all of
Hold
those
on.
things are equal, can we at least agree they should be paid the same?
That's already the law. So you're not allowed to discriminate based on gender or sex.
Yeah, but that saying it's the law doesn't mean you agree or disagree. It's just dodging the question.
Based on a law passed in the 1970s.
Right, yeah.
However, what is now being tried to be passed through other movements is to try to swoop in and say, regardless of qualifications, how often you ask for a raise. So I'll ask a question. Why do you think, for example, the average male looks as if they earn more than an average woman in a city? Is it because of sexism or other factors?
I think sometimes implicit bias can be one factor among many, but like all the things that you mentioned earlier, different qualifications, different business acumen, skills, work output, numbers of hours worked could all be things that impact pay.
Right. So
and like studies that like focus on the gaps between men and women like do make note of these differences.
Okay, Skiz Tech, thank you for getting the subs. Charlie, do you have a response?
Shit.
No, I hear that. I do want to actually get back to even more of a fundamental question, and I'm sorry I didn't ask this.
Sure.
What is a woman?
Oh god. Okay, cool.
A woman is somebody who presents as our social conception of womanhood.
So you,
Acts in such a way.
so Pixie, just can you answer that question without using woman or womanhood?
It's because basically it would be a functional definition. So as a society, we have an understanding of what woman is.
What is that?
Yeah, that's basically.
I'm a man. XY chromosomes.
Okay, but the problem with that is that I didn't check your chromosomes before coming in here and calling you a man, and you didn't check my chromosomes before coming in here
Or genitals.
Face.
and calling me a woman.
So let me just play this out. So first of all, you can't give me a definition without using the word woman.
That's a functional definition. Yeah, sure. Do you know what functional definitions are?
I'm very well aware, and you should have a functional definition for the most important question in civilization,
No.
right?
Well, the point of a functional definitions.
Notice how he like completely started ignoring her point, right? Like she's like, well, we didn't check each other's DNA, you know, you didn't do that. And like, yeah, that's a really good point. You know, transphobes don't actually have a way to answer that question. Like, well, if you think that like chromosomes are what makes someone a man or a woman, why haven't you demanded to see proof of my chromosomes before you start treating me as a man or a woman, you know? And frankly, he doesn't have a response for that, which is why he's trying to reframe it away from where it is right now.
Sorry. A definition that is by the function of something.
Oh,
so,
he's
like,
very
for
prepared,
example,
yes.
No, there's an
one
objective
equals
definition.
one. is like one is a function of one. Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I do. So then, can you give me an objective, a functional, utilitarian, any sort of biological definition of what a woman is? Because
The
how
problem is-
can we debate feminism if we can't agree what a woman is?
I would even, like, I feel like Pixie's definition absolutely satisfies the definition of what constitutes womanhood, but I would define it only slightly differently, which is that it's a person who performs a set of social roles that are typically associated with feminine characteristics, but not necessarily, because there are even cis women who fall outside of this.
Yeah.
And we still consider them women nonetheless. Like butch lesbians, for example, are women that exhibit very masculine characteristics, but nonetheless society
Many people
understands
are
them to
saying
be women. So
I find cis to be a very offensive word, by the way. I don't know how you feel about the cis.
I don't
cis men,
think-
cis
I don't
women.
think- I don't
I think
think
it's hate
deeply about
speech,
that.
to be honest.
I didn't mean.
Like he's saying it, but the way he's chuckling about it, like he seems like he's serious. Oh God, can you imagine if Sam Cedar went on this show? Oh my God, dude. I don't even know how that would go. I'm cis and I do not find the term offensive. I've literally no cis person I've ever met in my entire life is offended that the term cis exists, except for bigots.
Let me trigger you, Brian.
As-
I would have
as
given
a
you a trigger
s-
warning before if I
So,
had known.
do you think anyone can become a woman?
Yep, but not anyone will.
Okay, so then at what point do they become a woman?
It will depend on where they are in their gender transition for the
Does
most
it
part.
does it require drugs to become a woman?
No.
Personally, I think it's a mindset. It's a spiritual energy. It's the vibe that you give off. You know, like
The vibe. Before we continue on, I want to just give everyone an opportunity to answer Charlie. No, totally fine. To answer Charlie's question, I know you two had already answered. What is a woman? Starting with you, we'll go around the table. Go ahead.
Can you skip me?
We'll come back to her.
I'm a woman.
That's the best answer. That's the one that Ketanji Brown Jackson could have given.
So come back to you. Or?
Yeah, come back to me. Back to me. Let me
Sure.
brainstorm
Okay.
on
Go
that.
ahead.
Same. I'm
What is a woman?
like I don't.
What about you? Can I have you tilt your mic down just
Yeah,
a
of
tad?
course.
Perfect. Go ahead.
right there.
Yeah.
I'm a woman, but I also do think that a woman is someone who identifies as a woman. And that's that.
I mean, periodically, someone is born with a womb, but this generation obviously has proven that men can turn into women. So I'm not discluding that. I still think that they should be perceived as what they're portraying themselves as. But technically, I still think trans girls, they are a version of a man, but they can still be classed as a woman, which is a bit tricky. But yeah.
Molly.
Nah. That's weird.
I'll say the
That's
same
weird
answer.
British
I
turf
think
talk.
What constitutes as a woman is the energy that you give off and that you want to put out into the world.
So if being a woman or a female is a mindset, can your age also be a mindset? Can you choose to be, can you just say I feel 14, which is a classifiable mental condition, by the way,
So
Here's the thing. People say that all the time. People say, I feel like I'm 25. But, like, they don't mean they actually think they're 25. Right? Like, there's a difference between arguing with, like, the chronology of your body and arguing with, like, socially how you identify. These are two different things. One is far more malleable than the other, which is not. Yeah, I feel. How many people have said, I feel young again, or I feel old, I feel ancient, you know? But they're not identifying as ancient, they're not identifying as young.
I will say, yes, I know people that act way younger than they actually are, and they love acting way younger than they actually are. And I know people that, you know, like act way older than they are, and they, you know, and they pride themselves in that. And I think.
Okay, fair enough. So if a 35-year-old man claims he's 14, should we have any problem if he wants to have sex with another 14-year-old?
No. I'm not saying
No,
that you should.
Probably should have a problem. I think.
No, I'm not
Well,
saying that
good
they
idea to have
should
a
be
problem.
able to have sex, but
But
they can
who's to say
state
he's not
I
14?
feel 14.
Right,
They're
but-
allowed to state that.
Grid One Motorsports donated $200. The man who owns it paid himself 1.3 mil a day last year. He loves feminism. Today men acting female can be better women than real women. Feminism has failed you. How can the patriarchy help you today?
That was beautiful, Grid One. Thank you. Appreciate it.
That was beautiful.
So, going back.
But if your identity is an energy or a feeling that can change, why would it be wrong for a 35-year-old to say he's 14, therefore? But then how is someone who has male parts?
Because again, they're not identifying as being a certain age. They're just saying they feel a certain age. There's a difference. Someone who's like, oh man, I feel like a baby, isn't like literally going like, ah yes, I am goo 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 goo. Like they're able to think, they're able to be adults. Like, for example, people who do actual like adult baby stuff know that they're not babies. But Charlie Kirk, I feel like here is arguing that they actually think that, you know? It's insane.
A woman, if he's not
I
a
feel like
woman.
that's two different
It's
things.
Why?
different because
It's
you
a
can't go
mindset,
back
isn't
in
it?
time.
Your age isn't a mindset. I
Well,
mean,
but
like,
then why is your sex or your gender a mindset and your age isn't?
I don't know which one is which. One of you could probably
Well,
say, but
sex-
sex and
Do you
gender
agree?
is
At
different.
least acknowledge that sex and gender are two separate
Yeah,
things.
that's what I was gonna say.
There are 0 genders, 2 sexes, and infinite personalities. Gender doesn't exist.
No. Okay.
Sex does. So the parts you're born with is who you.
How does gender not exist?
So it,
There's a very easy way to counter Charlie's argument here, which is basically to be like, what you're saying directly contradicts what was said earlier, right? If gender doesn't exist, how did you know that the person who walked in was a woman? How did you know that? You didn't look at her genitals. You didn't, scan her chromosomes. You didn't make sure that she isn't suffering from some sort of chimeric DNA disorder where she has some male and some female DNA. You don't know. You don't know shit about shit. How we make those snap judgments in public is based on social conditioning, the social idea of gender. This is why gender is considered socially constructed. Gender is a very different thing from sex, which is why we define them differently. So again, if gender doesn't exist and only sex does, how did Charlie know any of these women were women? Yeah, honestly, I feel like Charlie Kirk has a decent control over rhetoric, but he also makes huge mistakes. And I think moving into an area where he's inadvertently arguing for as if he's a gender abolitionist is interesting, because he doesn't even believe what he's saying right now, and it's demonstrable.
It's a 1960s clinical term, largely made out of the Academy of John Money and Alfred Kinsey and many postmodern child psychiatrists, many of whom, by the way, were not
gender
really
didn't
people, but
exist
we
until the
don't go into that.
1960s.
But gender
Sure.
is a new term of the last 50 or 60 years.
Yeah, but it still exists.
But personalities exist. We can agree with that. Proclivities or interests or likes exist.
So by that definition, then if you're a woman or a man, is your energy. It is your personality.
Well, yeah, the goal, or what used to be the case, is the vast majority, 99.9% of all people, their biology and their reality, or how they viewed their reality, I should say, were in alignment, and now that's not so much the case. So people are, first of all, there's many elements to this. People are told that they can become something they can't, so they go on a very, very damaging, self-destructive pattern of medical interventions that even if you're pro-trans, you have to acknowledge that you know, a hysterectomy at age 17 is not exactly an easy surgery.
I don't think anyone at 17 should be altering their
Oh,
body. But
no, I agree. It's just it's happening right now. Thousands of young kids across the country are getting
every day.
It's called gender-affirming care, but it's irreversible.
Hair or
damage.
surgeries?
Both. So puberty blockers and hormone
There's
blockers.
thousands of kids that are getting hysterectomies across the United States.
No, thousands of kids are getting puberty blockers or hormone blockers or puberty blockers. Probably even more, tens of thousands.
You could stop using
and
those, though.
and as far
Like, this lady's just like, not. There are thousands of them. Even Charlie can't commit to his point, you know? Like, Charlie can't even be like, yeah, there are thousands happening. Like, he can't double down. He has to move off it. He has to be like, no, well, you know, I mean, they're happening in mass every year.
As far as breast reduction surgery or hysterectomies, we don't know the number, but I'll even say it's probably only a couple dozen. It's probably, you're right, it's probably not thousands.
Right.
But we don't know the exact numbers.
But there are thousands of children who get gender-affirming surgery who are cisgender. Charlie never talks about them. It's very interesting.
But an estimate...
But it wouldn't necessarily be a dunk to bring up to Charlie, because Charlie would just say, well, all of that should be banned.
Is anywhere between 10 to 15,000 minors and is growing are currently receiving monthly doses of hormone theory, estrogenic therapy.
Yeah, but you can stop those and be like...
Well, that's the question, right? There's a lot of detransitioners that are speaking out that are not able to
I wonder if someone on this panel is going to call him out on the fact that we have literally like 50 years of data on how hormone blockers work on kids because they were invented for use in cis children. And we literally have 50 years of data of those hormones being used on cis kids. So, like, we know what the effects of that drug is. We have half a century of data on it. Like, gender-affirming care is like, wait. The first open heart transplant was in 1967. Doesn't give me a timeline. Timeline. Doo-doo, doo-doo. Yeah, we literally have had anti-androgens available since 1954. So, literally, hormone blockers have been around and in use longer than we've had open heart surgeries. Does Charlie trust doctors to be able to do open heart surgery? Like open heart transplants? Does he trust doctors to be able to do something like that? Because that's literally a younger thing than our understanding of hormone blockers. My God.
Puberty is not an assembly line that you could just push a button and restart. That is a increasingly disproving scientific theory right now. Chloe Cole is one of the most famous detransitioners who, she's in her 20s and she was sold a bill of goods, and when she was 16 she said, I think I'm a man, and she went on a very, very aggressive regimen of hormone blockers and puberty blockers. And she has huge regret, and hopefully one day she'll be able to have have children again. But it gets back to a question of so I'm just making a point, though, that these ideas have consequences. It's more than just a silly question. Oh, what is a woman? That if you can't answer it, or at the very least say that you should allow minors to become adults before they make these decisions, then, and this is not a small thing, the quote-unquote gender-affirming care, we know that in California you have to be 18 years old to get a tattoo, and yet 14-year-olds can go to what we call a doctor and get a highly aggressive hormone replacement.
They can go to this thing. You'll never believe what it's called. A doctor.
Therapy, treatment, sometimes without even notifying their parents. And all of these are ramifications of the inability to answer very simple
without
biological.
telling their parents.
I would be interested in
how
seeing
often?
your exact study or citation for when it comes to puberty blockers, because I know a lot of people, or not a lot of people, there's a lot of people who end up on puberty blockers not because they're necessarily trans, but because they're going through puberty too early. And there are clear negative side effects and consequences of, let's say, a 10-year-old girl getting her period.
That's a separate, you're right. That
it's
is
used
right.
on cis children. I think what you're talking about is precocious puberty.
But it's not used on perfectly healthy, physically able-bodied children, right? So there's a great book that I guess we have
Modest
to do this,
It operates the same in the only thing different about precocious puberty is that the pituitary glands start pumping out the hormones. All hormone blockers do is prevent that from happening, or it just prevents those hormones from being picked up and absorbed into the body, depending on the hormone blocker you're using, right? And so, all that happens here is you stop taking them, and then the hormones get absorbed in your body. I hate when they bring up singular
cases. Show me statistics or GTFO.
Yeah, data is the enemy of the TERF movement. Thank you for the $5 dono. I really genuinely appreciate it, Catalina Gearbox.
Donated $200. Charlie, sorry you had to travel to California for the show. My boy did you dirty by putting you next to the demon. WTF?
I don't think you're a demon, by the way.
Props on the new Rick Rickson.
Okay, well, maybe you are a demon. May Christ
Pixie,
be with
you are brain dead. Sad.
All right, Modest Obama, good to see you.
I'll reference one book, and she's a non-political doctor. Her name is Dr. Miriam Grossman. It's a book called Lost in Translation. She has treated, not just theorized. She's a clinician and a physician, not just someone who writes abstract medical journals. And she is one of the most outspoken people against what is called gender-affirming care. And she's treating hundreds of kids that are now
So I
damaged
know
by this.
detransitioners exist, but what do you say to the thousands of trans people that actually report happiness and being healthy after they receive gender-affirming care?
Don't doubt that in the short term, testosterone therapy from someone who has a fair amount of testosterone, it can make you feel confident. It can make you feel better in your skin. That is not a lasting effect, though.
But it is for some people.
Well,
it's not a lasting effect. So Charlie, we could take away your testosterone, you wouldn't feel any different. If you didn't have testosterone in your body, you wouldn't have confidence, and you wouldn't feel good in your skin. Interesting.
Suicide rate, I can't say that word.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, at a certain point, this needs to move out of vibes-based territory and into actual data town, you know? Data town needs more residents, Charlie.
The self-harm rate after 8 to 10 years actually goes up. It nearly doubles. And we're still studying it. That's the other point, is that I'm not going to throw around a lot of studies here. And
we're still studying everything, Charlie. We're still studying the fucking moon.
But let me give you an example. If a medication is on the market and it harms 1 in 250,000 people, for example, Robitussin. You guys ever take Robitussin?
Archangel.
No, it's a cough thing. It's, they found that.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thank you for the 15 Australian dollar dues. Always appreciated. My God. And hope you're doing well. I know you've been recovering lately, and it's really lovely to see.
Lots of Robitussin last week might have been contaminated, and they did a massive recall, right? And it was just a whisper of it, okay? The point that is in medicine, the first rule used to be first do no harm. And the fact
still is, right?
No, they changed it.
The Hippocratic Oath?
They changed it.
Who's they?
the American Medical Association and a lot of the medical institutions. It's similar, but it's
chained
not
by
the
like
same.
woke ideology.
Well, you'd be surprised, actually. The medical industry has been taken over by a lot of radical
All
forces.
doctors are woke now.
Well,
Honestly, this is a great way to counter his bullshit. When you force him to start talking about data, when you force him, he has to resort to, well, the American Medical Association is actually subject to a massive conspiracy to cover up the truth, and you force him to kind of have to exist in conspiracy land, where none of what he says makes any sense unless you're already in his kind of cult-like line of thinking. I think they're actually doing a really good job on this show, pushing him into a corner here.
Well, for example, I mean, when they were giving monoclonal antibodies in the city of New York, they were prioritizing people based on the color of their skin. Black individuals who got monoclonal antibodies above their white counterparts.
Was it based on the color of their skin, or like maybe their background related to like their socioeconomic status?
It was racial, but I don't want to get too deep into that rabbit hole. But the point...
Charlie can't go to Data Town because he's stuck in Blight Town. He's an under-leveled scrub who took the sewers instead of New Londo.
True, Abyssal. It's true. Thank you for the $5 dono and the Dark Souls reference. I enjoyed that a lot. What's funny here is that he's like, she very reasonably is like, what were they allowed in because of their race or because of their socioeconomic status, right? Which is a great question, because it is far likelier that the intended policy was to target people who are in more vulnerable positions regarding COVID. But Charlie doesn't want to talk about that. Notice how quickly he moved away from that.
That I'm just trying to make is that in medicine in particular, you must have a cautious approach, even if there were pluses and positives. It might very well be true. If there's even a 1%, a 2% adverse event, you pull the drug immediately because you do no harm. If there's something actively damaging a society, and it's now a certifiable fact that we see thousands of young kids are being told that they can transition, when in reality they have other underlying issues that we should address. Depression, trauma, anxiety, or they're on the autism spectrum disorder, and they get mislabeled on whether a TikTok video or some sort of other thing makes them feel as if they might have, a transgender issue, when they very well might have other issues that need to be addressed. 1 in 27 men are young boys are autistic. Anyway, sorry, I don't mean to...
You know what's funny about this? One, being autistic doesn't mean you're any less trans. Okay? Number two, what's funny about this is he's like, oh, we need to get the mental health care. Conservatives don't give a single shit about mental health care. They've had super majorities. They haven't done a single thing to help people with mental illness who need access to mental health care. Not a single thing. Every time a mass shooting, oh, we need to prioritize mental health. Oh, we need to prioritize mental health. Look at all these dead babies. We need to prioritize mental health. And then it never, ever happens. Not a single time. I have never, it doesn't happen. But what's interesting here is that even if they did care, Charlie would still want trans people or like gender affirming care to be banned, even though all of the empirical data we have on this shows that the condition of trans people improves when they have access to gender affirming care.
More greasing up from the sweet, sweet Aussie oil.
Salmon Moose, thank you for the 5 gifted tier 1 subs. My goodness. Oiling me up all the way from the land down under. Thank you. Goddamn BWA community hero over here. But like, what Charlie can't admit is that the single most effective treatment for kids who come to therapy or come to their loved ones and express these gender feelings, the most effective treatment is gender affirming care. You establish a period of consistency that shows that they aren't going to revert. That helps you eliminate other types of symptoms from what they could possibly be suffering from. And then you provide hormone blockers. Hormone blockers just buy time. They just buy time so that more assessment of a kid, teenager can continue, so that, if they decide, well, I'm actually cisgender, they can just stop taking the hormone blockers and go through with their puberty, right? Alternatively, they decide, I think I am really trans. Then they stay on the hormone blockers, and then they start HRT, and they go through a normal puberty. The only thing that Charlie cares about here is, like, the fact that he might walk down the street someday and see a lady that he finds attractive and he wants to fuck. And then it turns out, oh, wait. She's trans. And that makes him feel funny and gross. In a way he doesn't really want to, interrogate. He just wants to say, it makes me feel gross, so I must destroy it. That's the extent of a fascist's reasoning. So, yeah, what he doesn't understand is that the solution to the mental health problems faced by trans people is trans-affirming care. And he's not interested in solving that problem.
Totally fine. I just had a quick question for you two, since you guys had pretty strong positions on this. Can men get pregnant?
Grid 1 Motorsports donated $200. If you want to talk nonsense, then honesty requires we first admit that gender dysphoria is a mental condition which should be treated first before any physical treatments are given. Accuracy matters.
All right, Grid 1 Motorsports.
They no longer
Appreciate
call it gender dysphoria, unfortunately. I would actually make your argument for you. They don't even call it a medical condition. They call it, I actually don't even know what it's actually called. Gender dysphoria used to be the clinical term, but
they've changed it since.
So yeah, that's right. But I can go deeper into that. The old way we used to treat this is called watchful waiting, where we believed that puberty was the solution, not the problem. And almost every single case, and Europe was actually the pioneer of this, is that when
because if they grew up to be gay, you'd kill them. Like that's why.
Allow puberty to play its course, these individuals, they might end up being lesbian or gay, but not transgender. And that's a completely different thing that doesn't require hormones or eventually antidepressants on top.
I need to be very clear. Charlie also hates like gay and lesbian people. Like he's literally partnered with an evangelical church that like preaches about like the evils of being gay. Okay? Like he's not a good guy. It's not like he likes the gays. He just hates trans people even more and sees them as a more vulnerable, more hittable target. This is horrifying. Yeah, absolutely. I hope that they're able to push back a bit more on this.
But I'm sorry, Pixie, you were going to say something. So.
Yeah, my question was, can men get pregnant?
Two things. I would say if you're a biological male, if we're going to define male through biology or whatever, then no. I do want to push back on some things that I heard earlier.
Well, before you do that, go ahead. Aaron, do you have a answer to that?
I would say yes, because anybody who has a uterus has the capacity to give birth. So, for example, a trans guy who gets pregnant, yes, would be a man who is pregnant. But if you're talking about a man who is assigned man at birth and does not have a uterus, then no, he doesn't have the ability to get pregnant. You look at me like I'm crazy or what? Do you disagree?
But a lot of women.
So do you want to know why young men are going away from the left? That's why young men are leaving the left.
Why?
Because what you just said is...
Because they're uncomfortable acknowledging reality? That some trans men can get pregnant?
What you just said is at war with reality and, massacring...
I mean, a lot of women can't get pregnant either.
Vocabulary.
So that
yeah, exactly.
It's just a question, I'll let you come in just a sec, Pixie. Which one of you referenced chromosomes? Is that well? You said you didn't check our chromosomes, right? Yeah. Well, people understood what a woman was before chromosomes were discovered.
Yeah.
So the definition does not require this type of abstraction.
People understood.
Yeah, but people prior to this knew that there were different ways to define women. This is true, by the way, especially if you look outside of a Western context. There are tons of people from societies with, India notably has like one of the largest populations on the planet, has had like a recognized third gender for like 2,000 years. Like, I'm sorry, they're just wrong. They're just wrong on this one. Like, clearly, even in the past, gender and sex were two different things.
What a woman was on the basis of the societal norms at the time, generally speaking, right?
Well, it's more
Which was my
precisely, it's about
answer,
like
yeah.
the gonads. If you were at any point in your life going to produce large gametes, then you're a woman.
How society, at least most societies as well, outside of like Western as well, but even Western, we can make this argument.
Okay.
What they would look at is the way that a person is like necessarily performing. So what is their role? That's why you have like the idea of like non-binary, third gender, et cetera, because there have been people also who have not performed their role as like a male or female. So they're put
Sure.
into the third category, third sex, whatever.
Okay.
So I would argue that for the vast majority of human histories and societies, what they look at is what is your performance. And that maps on to what we do now, because we don't really look at biology, we look at people act. That's why, let me finish.
Go ahead.
That's why we also, the terms less manly, he's less of a man than him,
Yeah.
or she's not that womanly, makes sense. If gender was truly a binary, those words would make no sense. It would be like
True.
cat and not cat. That doesn't, you can't have a in between really. And the same thing applies for gender. There is a spectrum there. That's why the words less womanly, more manly, less manly make sense to us.
And all of those things are fluid throughout time. Like what constituted like masculine tendencies or behaviors will be different now than it was several years ago. Or even like things like colors. Like for example, pink used to be considered a masculine color. Pink is no longer really considered a masculine color. It's considered a feminine color. So there was never anything inherently masculine about the color blue or the color pink or anything like that. That could always change at any given point in time.
Do you think
True.
that male brains and female brains, or men and women brains, are different, wired differently?
There are differences between male and female brains, but I believe it's a matter of like statistical averages of like gray matter. There's not going to be like distinct anatomical features that differentiate a female brain from a male brain.
Really? You really think that?
Well, no, it's proven, like scientifically.
Well,
like
no,
when we
it's
take,
not.
yes, it is. When we take a brain scan of a male and female, the average doctor can't look and be like, that is a male brain right there.
Not true.
Now,
No, hold on.
Wait,
if
let
you
me
do a
finish my
SPEC
That's
sentence, please.
absolutely
scan,
true.
okay, if you do a SPEC scan, you can see what parts of the brain light up. And in a woman, the basal ganglia and the amygdala is far more active, which is the inner thought matrix. Women have a far busier inner thought life than men do. Would you?
Citation needed. Citation needed. Citation needed. Also, even if you were to establish that, hormones have such a drastic effect on the body, how do you know that, like, introducing hormones might not change brain activity? What he's talking about here is brain activity, which is affected by, like, all kinds of different aspects about your day-to-day life. What you eat, how much water you drink, what medications you're on, your hormones, etc., right? And like all of this can change by altering one of those things. And yes, Dylan, very importantly, the brain responds to social stimuli. You know, we can interpret sometimes emotional, psychic, mental damage, you know, in physical terms. Our brain registers it in very similar ways. And like, ten-letter name, you will be safe outside. You're gonna be okay, all right? You need to go out and get those necessities, but then you can come right back to your apartment or wherever you live and curl up under a blanket and take some deep breaths, and maybe while you're out you can get like a little snack as like a reward. But basically the brain argument, like the brain literally responds to whether or not people accept you in your life or whether they don't accept you. You're going to have different mental reactions. You're going to have different parts of your brain activated here. if you are perceiving yourself to be socially ostracized and isolated. So again, all of what Charlie is talking about is on averages, and I've had a brain expert on the show, a literal neuroscientist on the show. We should get him back on here. It's my friend Alex. And we talked about the quality of like brain scanning. It's not that good right now. Like, seeing brain activity, he compared it to like where people were when we were just like knocking rocks against each other to make sharpened like spearheads, you know? So like, again, Charlie's point here, ironically, he's trying to make it sound like his most scientific and like most backed point is one of the weakest in his entire arsenal so far in this debate, which is how you can tell he's doing actually pretty terribly here. It's actually kind of fascinating. These women have thrown him off his game.
Do you agree with that?
I agree.
Right,
I
but
was gonna say it's very.
So that's not true.
It's very
Wait.
well known that like men generally are more on the logical side of things, and women are more on the emotional side of things. And I think that has a big role, or the way that our brains are wired has a big role to play. I'm not saying that if you took babies who were completely unmolded, that their brains would look different. But I think as we age, living in the gender that we are given, our brains become attuned to certain things, and that's why parts of our
Yeah,
brains
like
light up.
piggybacking off of that point, I don't doubt that the studies that you looked at did find differences in like brain mapping scans between men and women, but the key thing is that they looked at men and women, so that's already a brain that's been subjected to a lifetime, or not a lifetime, but like decades-long
So do you-
socialization.
let-
so
I
that
just wanna
socialization is
make
going to
sure-
impact it. If you looked at
They
like
nailed
a
it.
brain
They
scan
nailed the
of, like,
argument.
infants, for example, like a male infant and a female infant,
Hell
it would
yeah.
be like how different would it really
So-
look? Do you think it would look significantly different?
No, it's not even close. Of course, it's different, and I can prove it to you in two ways. But the first one, do you guys know the John Money gender experiment?
Oh God, of
So-
course.
Okay, I'll just really quick. John Money, who is a total creep, he believed that people before we mapped.
Yeah. So what he's about to talk about is John Money doing unauthorized and discredited research on a family that had twins, and one of the kids, I believe, had a botched circumcision, right? And then after that botched circumcision, John Money decided that they would do bottom surgery on the infant, raise it as a girl. And like, the conclusions of this study were flawed. The ethics of it were horrible. I believe the child that was transitioned at birth, like, wound up committing suicide. It is an incredibly, incredibly sad story. But something to note is that, like, this was not done in the way that Charlie is about to portray it. Yeah, basically, in 1966, a botched circumcision left 8-month-old Reimer without a penis. Money persuaded the baby's parents that sex reassignment surgery would be in Reimer's best interest. At the age of 22 months, Reimer underwent an orchiectomy in which his testicles were surgically removed. He was reassigned to be raised as female, and his name changed from Bruce to Brenda. Money further recommended hormone treatment, to which the parents agreed. Money then recommended a surgical procedure to create an artificial vagina, which the parents refused. Money published a number of papers reporting the reassignment as successful. David Reimer was raised under the optimum gender rearing model, which was the common model for sex and gender socialization for intersex youth. The model was heavily criticized for being sexist and for assigning an arbitrary gender binary. Because, of course, it was the 60s. Let's see. According to John Colapinto's biography of David Reimer, Starting when Reimer and his twin brother were 6 years old, Money showed the brothers pornography and forced the two to rehearse sexual acts. Money would order David to get on all fours and Brian be forced to come up behind him, etc., etc., etc. I'm not going to read any more of that. It is truly disgusting. Nothing of value was learned from this study. All that was learned was that these kids were sexually tormented by a sick man. John Money is evil, right? And like his studies on this are all like discredited, obviously, because he was facilitating like evil, horrific acts. And so conservatives will bring this up to point out, essentially, to try and point out that like, oh, well, actually, gender ideology is evil and is predicated on abusing children, etc., etc., etc. And yeah, eventually David Reimer wound up committing suicide. And yeah. Basically, the one valuable thing from this entire situation, and I mean, it's really hard to narrow down like the causative element of the suicide, but like it's pretty clear reading even a cursory overview of David Reimer's life that like the forcing of him to be a woman messed him up. Right? Like, he was a cisgender man who was being forced to be a woman. And, like, ultimately, the lesson here is that we shouldn't be forcing gender identity on anybody. And also, the very clear need for the oversight of studies, especially when it comes to children. 1960s had insane standards, I guess. I hate saying we learned something from it. I mean, it's literally the only, like, silver lining to the entire story. You know? If we learn nothing from that, then literally David Reimer, like, the entire thing suffered for nothing, you know? Yeah, no, basically when all of this came out, like John Money was discredited and absolutely like stricken from the record. Unfortunately, he died largely before a lot of this came to light, so that's my understanding anyway. Yeah, I mean, like, also, here's just, like, another tidbit, right? Transphobes like Charlie Kirk like to portray John Money as, like, an exemplar of what the trans movement is. And it's noteworthy that, like, the papers that have since been written about John Money and his abuse and, like, the horrors of his practice, show that John Money, like, described trans women as, and I'm going to quote here, devious, demanding, and manipulative in their relationships with people on whom they are also dependent and possibly also incapable of love. This was not a guy who was, like, pro-trans by any means, you know? And ironically, as Charlie Kirk is about to make an argument against John Money and his therapy, John Money believed the same thing Charlie Kirk does, which is that, like, confining men and women to stereotypical gender roles is ultimately good for them and helps solidify society. So like and I'm saying all of this because I know Charlie Kirk is about to bring him up to try and criticize transgender, like the transgender healthcare, right? When in reality, John Money agreed far more with Charlie Kirk here. So,
human genome. Okay, this is before we even knew about chromosomes. He said that men and women are blank slates at birth, and he said that they're formed through the toys we give them, the colors we appropriate to them, and they're blank slates. There was these identical twins. One of the twins burns themselves terribly in the genitals, and he said raise that twin as a girl. And basically his entire life he was tortured.
Wait, no, it was a botched circumcision. It wasn't just like a random burn on the genitals.
And, awful story, eventually rebelled against John Money. And this twin eventually was told that, hey, you were born a boy but raised as a girl and even had a vagina put onto you artificially. And he was like, instead of being mad, he was relieved because he said, I knew I was a boy all along. So there's no clinical evidence to support that. Secondly, though, it's a funnier one, okay? You hear me out. And I think this will resonate with all of you. Harvard University locked a group of men in a room alone, 100 of them, and a group of women in a room alone, okay? And they said, what did you think about for 30 minutes? The men, no surprise, sex and sports. The young ladies, what did they think of for 30 minutes? They replayed conversations that they had in the last couple of days. For the record, a man has never replayed conversations that they've had.
That's
Our
not true.
brains are different, everybody.
I feel like I overthink.
No, of course not. Hold on, I'm making.
You've never had like a shower arguments or like shower thoughts or anything like that?
No.
He's lying, of course, but he's lying because his entire fascist philosophy is dependent on a lack of introspection. It is literally dependent on him not thinking about things he has said or done in the past. Clearly he has done these things, so he's a liar here, very obviously, but also like all men think about conversations. Like your brains are not the same, like are not different, sorry, from women's. Like our brains function the same.
And that's not society, my friend. That is biology. You are wired to have those rethought. We aren't. It's not a learned behavior. It's not about dolls. It's not about dresses. Our biology, our brains are made differently.
I don't think anyone's disputing that we have like different.
We don't replay any conversations.
Ever.
Men
You've
don't.
never like done that.
The thing
Am I trans? Because sometimes sometimes I will.
You gotta go on
Very
hormone
rarely,
blockers.
though.
Even
Very
the
rarely,
host is like,
sometimes
nah,
occasionally.
that's silly.
Men are
I'll
very
replay
forward
conversation.
thinking. What is next? The job, the interview, tomorrow. And not saying women aren't. Women are very reflective. That's why females are better at poetry. Women are better at the more relational type aspects of being a nurse or an elementary school teacher. Again, that's not learned behavior. There is a biological element to it, and it starts with we don't even understand the brain as much as we can. We understand like 1% of 1% of it. But I think that study and your reaction affirms it. Because if I had a group of men around you, like, what do you think of when you're alone? Like, I just think of the NFC Championship game, the stock market, and all the women I've been with are the women I want to be with. It's a little different.
Do you think if they had
I want
conducted
them
the
to be
study in
meaner.
a different country, that the men and women would have given these same answers?
Yes, I think that these things are universal, and I mean I can't say to that. That would be my
Citation
speculation. That the men in Iran are thinking about soccer and Persian women, and the women are thinking about what's going on in their local neighborhood. These things transcend continent, they transcend culture, and we know that because one of the arguments that you were making is that, well, at the fundamental root, these are learned and acted, these are put on by Western society, but if you go into African villages, like very poor third world African villages, they don't even come to transgender. The idea that a man can become a woman or a woman can become man, this is a uniquely Western.
Man, it's crazy. It's crazy that you reference those groups of people. I wonder if you looked at literally any other parts of the planet. I wonder if you looked at all of the different societies in Africa, or if you're just trying to use some of them to make a point here. It's very interesting to me. No, Stabman. The only indigenous people you can think about are people in Africa, and only then the ones that agree with Charlie Kirk. Okay.
Western phenomenon that is
Charlie
born
is
out
a
of the
simpleton.
academy, born out of college, that I will say, and I think we could agree, is largely they prey on people that have other underlying issues, and then it gets built on top of that. Autism spectrum disorder, depression, anxiety, some other sort of bipolar, schizophrenia, trauma, things of that nature?
There's a couple of things to push back here.
Good, do
Fine.
it.
If you can, quick.
Do it.
I don't
Get
mean
his
to- I
ass.
don't mean to monopolize. I'm sorry, Pixie.
No, it's
Yeah.
okay. There's a couple of things. I do want to push back on that because like there are like communities and cultures that we could search up right now in China, India, various like Native American like histories that have recognized the idea of like third gender or outside gender that doesn't fit into this binary. So I wouldn't say it's just Western.
That is
and then
true.
on top
Wait,
of
let
that,
him answer.
No, but no, no. You please continue. You are right. I can address that at length. I don't think it's fruitful.
Okay,
Keep
okay,
going.
go ahead.
okay.
You're not wrong.
And then on top of that, you gave a case study. I kind of want to give a case study back. NPR did a article on this. I can't remember the name, but basically it was about a person who felt gender fluid. And when they felt like they were a man and they did things like facial recognition or other tests regarding that, they would score like a man does, like higher than most women. But when they got into the mindset of being a woman, they would score higher in women-related tasks. So yeah, it does come back. You're saying like this is all predisposed biology, but there might be something to be said about like, oh no, if you're thinking like a man, the mindset of a man, maybe that's more in tune with certain ways of thinking versus thinking like a woman. That doesn't mean it's all 100% biological basis. It means that like, hey, if you're raised to think in a certain pattern, you're going to perform in that pattern.
I agree. I mean, if a society can mold you, of course, but you're dealing with very powerful raw material that's underestimated in the current cultural conversation. And you can only guide that raw material so much. So let me ask another hypothetical. I'll just tell you, if I sit down with men, what do they always talk about? They talk about macro concepts, big things, stock market, sports, things that are very, like let's just say bigger than individual. Women, if you sit down, they'll talk a lot about conversations or relationships, their kids, very micro. This, one of the reasons why men and women's brains can be different is there's different skill sets, and I think we can all acknowledge
Men
that.
would
Like,
never
men are
talk
better at
about
some
their
things than
children.
Women, women
What?
are better at some
the
things than
hell,
men. I don't know
dude?
why that is a wildly
Which the way that you frame it is like, oh, women are awesome at like small talk and like sewing or whatever, and then men are just awesome at like the stock market and being CEOs.
Let me ask you a question. Hold on. Why is it? Let me ask you a question. Why is it that the
That's
International
literally
Chess
why he's talking
Foundation
about it that way.
doesn't want biological men who believe they are women to compete with women? They say that will not allow
Notice the
trans men
pivot?
into the female
Notice
category.
this crazy
Notice
pivot
I can't
here.
speak to that, but I'm just, if you're going to talk about like representation being the thing that lets you know that, oh, men are obviously smarter, you could break this down to race.
I never said smarter. I never said smart. I said different.
Then different.
Women.
Okay, then we could say this.
My wife does things with my child that I can't even dream of doing, such as having an intuition, compassion, empathy. She can operate on 30 minutes of sleep. I need 8 hours, or else I'm like.
Bro. Imagine going on a show and saying you don't have empathy, intuition, and you also don't take care of your own child. Like you're not like you're letting your wife only get 30 minutes of sleep per night. Go sit up with that baby. Yeah, the self-report here is so strong. Like in the span of like 20 seconds, he just talks about how he's a shitty dad with no compassion or empathy or intuition. He's talking like he's a complete alien in his own house, like he doesn't even understand what a child is. I mean, I feel sorry for whoever married this clown.
Don't underestimate yourself, Charlie.
Hold
I
on
think
a
you
second.
can
No,
definitely
hold on.
these types of
No,
things.
women have a different giftedness, I believe, given by God that is completely different than men. I never said smarter. In fact, a woman's intuition is far better than my intuition. I trust my wife's gut when it comes to people, when it comes to relationships, and she leans on me for investments or politics. We are given different gifting. Now, with that being said, some women have a gifting in that direction. Those are the exception, though. There is a general rule, and the general rule is that women are far more gifted at people and caretaking and the intimate. I don't mean that demeaning or derogatory. I never use the word smarter or dumber. That you might be inferred. Oh, thank you, Molly.
No, I actually very much agree with what you're saying. Me personally, I mean, sexuality is a big part of my life, and I think what you're saying actually really ties into a lot of like sexuality, because it's the man's role to be, you know, kind of like I mean, if you're talking like the nuclear family, you know, it's like the man's role to kind of be the governing force of the family, take care of everything on the outside, take care of, you know, the finances, the stocks, all of that, and to kind of be the rock for all of the little things that the woman has to go through during the day. Just all the little conversations, all the things that she has to deal with that you're not there. And I think that, you know, it's a really beautiful thing, like yin and yang, you know, like there's
beautiful.
Parts of men that complement women, and there's parts of women that complement men. And the best thing is there's things that women can do that men cannot, and there's things that men can do that women cannot. And I think that the issue is we try and figure out like who's better, who's more powerful, who can, you know, who gets to say what happens. And I think that the issue that's really dividing, and the beauty comes when you kind of bring those skills together.
That's wonderfully said, Molly.
That was beautiful, Molly. Let me.
As the Ukraine.
Man, absolutely blown apart, dude. Blasted, even. Charlie Kirk is maybe someone I dislike him very intensely, you know? He has, like... What if Charlie's misogyny lines up with my trans experience? Is he accidentally affirming, describing me as a personable housewife gal? I guess so. You know, combined with Jordan Peterson earlier saying that, like, it's entirely possible for a man to have negative masculine utility at taking on feminine utility in the process. That, I mean, combine Jordan Peterson with Charlie Kirk. You got the ultimate femboy enjoyer.